Second work-life integration career discussion. We are very excited to host a distinguished panel of speakers, insights from women academics. This is sponsored by our Global Women's Studies program, and I know Professor Valerie Hegstrom had hoped to be here. She is traveling, or she would have. My name is Corey Leonard, Associate Director here at the Kennedy Center, and we're really excited for this event. Just so you know, it is part of an emerging new series that we hope to continue each semester. So we're really grateful for your interest, and we also will be recording this, and we're streaming it live on overflow.byu.edu. So this is something, probably the best kept secret on campus. But during the pandemic, we were able to integrate this room with the overflow system. So it's us, the Marriott Center, the library. And what it means is you can watch any live event from here, from the Marriott Center or the library, on your phone, or on your tablet, or on your computer. You just have to be on the campus network. So again, but we will be making this available on our YouTube channel. So we look forward to not only your involvement today, but those who will be able to join us in the recording as we go forward. Want to give thanks to each of the presenters and to the Global Women's Studies for organizing this, especially Natalie Hansen from Career Services, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to pull together all of the details, as well as her staff, and Professor Melissa Jones, who will be moderating and leading the discussion today. As is our custom, we'll begin with an opening prayer. We've asked Hannah Wood, who is a psychology major, Global Women's Studies minor from Jamesport, Missouri, to offer that prayer, and then we'll turn the time over to Professor Melissa Jones.
All right, welcome everyone. I am just going to introduce myself briefly, and then I'm going to invite the panelists to each introduce themselves as well for about 2 minutes. After that, we'll jump into some pre-planned questions for about 20 minutes, followed by audience questions. So we'd love to hear what questions we have from the audience. I'll ask you to just stand up and speak up, and we'll hear your questions, and then we'll wrap up. My name's Dr. Melissa Jones. I'm a psychology assistant professor. I graduated from the University of Maryland 15 years ago with my Ph.D. in counseling psychology. I then worked for 10 years part-time as a clinician and doing some research on the side. And then about 5 years ago, I was hired by the psychology department on a professional track to train our doctoral students in clinical psychology. So I really enjoy training students. I enjoy especially mentoring women students who are trying to prepare for this path of academic balance with family and with life. I'm also the mother of 4 boys. And let's start with Dr. Krista Matthews. Could you introduce yourself?
Yes, okay. Hi, I'm Dr. Krista Matthews. I am a professor of English here at BYU, specializing in 20th and 21st century American literature, particularly women's lit and African American literature. I did my PhD at the one true Big Ten University of Wisconsin. Well, you're now Big Ten, but anyways, I won't mention to our distinguished guests that as a freshman at the University of Wisconsin, I had a T-shirt that said, "Friends don't let friends go to Minnesota." But. And so I've been here at BYU. This is my 18th year, which is hard for me to believe. But I see my role at BYU as using story to help people learn about those who may be different from them so that they can recognize common humanity, develop empathy, and love people. So that is me. Oh, and I'm part owner of the Green Bay Packers.
Okay, Dr. Jessica Birch.
Hi, everyone. I am Jessica Birch. Yes, there is a rivalry between Wisconsin
I keep calling her Jessica. I'm sorry, Jerica. Jerica Birch.
That's fine. I get it all the time. But yes, there is a rivalry between Minnesota and Wisconsin. I am from the University of Minnesota, and excited to be here and excited to hear some of your questions, because I think all questions are good questions, and I'll be glad to hear what you're thinking about. My passion is around especially women in academia and finding your passion and your reason to do such things. So I did my undergrad here at BYU and then my master's in marriage and family therapy. fell in love with clinical work and research, and especially in the field of medical family therapy. And so I went on to do my Ph.D. at the University of Minnesota, and it was in both family studies and what's called integrated care, which is a clinical or medical family therapy, same kind of synonymous thing, where you do holistic care and provide to patients both mental health, physical health, spiritual, all you can think of, biopsychosocial, spiritual kind of lens. So I still do that. A day in a life kind of for me looks like I do a little bit of therapy in the clinic, training our MD residents as well as our PhD behavioral medicine is what they get called in the medical school, but medical family therapists, and then teaching as well. And then a big part of my appointment is research. So I do about 70% research, and I do a lot of National Institutes of Health funded research in the area of child and health promotion. So that's kind of the broad picture for me. And most recently, that last kind of 5 years, I've done a lot of more administrative and leadership roles. And so I currently lead a center called the Center for Women in Medicine and Science. So that's a little bit about me. And 2 kids, 1 daughter and son, and then my husband, Nels.
Great, thank you. Dr. Denise Stevens.
Okay, so let's see. My name is Denise Stevens. I've been here at BYU now for 15 years in January. I'm an associate professor in physics and astronomy, and my research emphasis is in the study of what's called brown dwarf atmospheres and discovery of extrasolar planets and studying extrasolar planet atmospheres. I did my bachelor's degree here at BYU and got that in 1996, and did my master's and my PhD at New Mexico State, both in astronomy, and then I was a postdoc at the Space Telescope Science Institute, which is who runs Hubble, who will run James Webb Space Telescope soon, and then another 3-year postdoc at Johns Hopkins before I came here as faculty. I was always told you can only be a mom or a scientist, you can't be both. So I like to highlight that I have 7 kids, all by choice, no church culture thing, right, going on. I mean, my husband only wanted 2 kids, right? So this is all me. I wanted a big family. But you know, you can't have it all, but you can have what you want. And I think as a woman in science, I'm looking at this classroom for a minute and thinking, oh, the guys, there's very few of you. That's how it was for me in science. I was the one girl or one of 2 girls in a room full of boys. And so having to overcome the social stigmas and become comfortable in who I was and my abilities when I felt constantly under the eye of gender discrimination.
Thank you. Dr. Eva Weissman.
Hi, I'm Eva Weissman. I am an assistant professor. I just demoted myself. Associate professor of public management in the Romney Institute over at the Marriott School. I've been there for 13 years, and I mostly teach and study social impact. So I look at the social impact of nonprofit and government organizations and how those organizations are different from private for-profit organizations. And recently, I've also been focused more on the social impact of for-profit organizations. That is definitely an increasing area of involvement there. I have 4 kiddos and a husband. We live in Springville. We keep chickens and apple trees and pear trees and grapes and bees and all kinds of other good things. So I want to echo what Denise said, like you may not be able to have it all, but you can certainly create a dream and work toward it. And that's definitely what I've sought to do here.
Fantastic. It's an honor to be here with all of you. Okay, so the first question we have is that we frequently hear about imposter syndrome. Have you ever felt it? And if so, how do you combat it? Feel free to just speak up if you have an answer.
So I have an answer to this one. Okay. So this is me putting my therapy hat on. So I think there's kind of 2 things. First of all, you normalize it because everyone feels it. I don't care who you are. And second, you do what's called externalize it. So in therapy, there's a approach called narrative therapy, and it literally talks about not carrying around an identity or symptom. Instead, you externalize it. And so I always talk about how just you wear kind of imposter syndrome on your shoulder, and you just flick it off whenever you're feeling it. And in narrative therapy, they even encourage you to name it. And so sometimes you name it after a person or a situation that made you feel most in that realm of imposter syndrome. And so I had an experience once, and unfortunately, sometimes women can be your worst critics. So I had someone in my life who was not so nice and made me feel imposter syndrome all the time when I was an assistant professor. And so now as I'm a full professor, like I look back on that, and it's one of those things where it brings me back immediately to those feelings. And so I call my imposter syndrome Shermie, because this is part of this person's name. And I just say, I can feel Shermie coming on, and you literally like just flick that off your shoulder, and you go along with it, because you have to normalize and externalize, and you go on your way. You just can't let it dwell.
Lovely. Anyone else? Okay, well, we can move on to another question. Let's talk about applying for graduate school. So what are your best tips for applying for graduate school, surviving, and thriving in graduate school? So my guess is a lot of the people here are considering applying for graduate school. What tips do you have for them?
I guess I could go here really quickly. So as far as going to graduate school goes, especially in the different disciplines, sometimes we think that it's the big name that matters, but it's more important that graduate school have the program of interest that you want to study, right? That there's some faculty member there that is doing some kind of a research in an area that you find attractive, that you think this is where I might want to go. You can change your mind, right? But too often we make a checklist of schools we want to go to, and I see this at least in our physics and astronomy majors, rather than thinking clearly about what do I want to do at that program. Then when they get to the program, they can't do the research they want to do, then they're kind of lost. And when you're applying to graduate school, it's so important to have in mind what research you want to do and who you want to work with. As you're writing your application and you're identifying your interests and you're writing that essay, is so important, because everyone has great grades and everybody has great GRE scores. But what's really important is standing out and identifying what you want to do. So that's one thing I see a lot of times students make the mistake of listing the dream schools, but those dream schools don't always have what they want to do.
I second that, and doing your research is important in thinking about applying for graduate school and where you might want to go. And I think that a really important thing, something I did not do, is seeking help and mentorship from your current professors, because they can tell you about certain programs. They can read over your statement of purpose. They can give you feedback. They can connect you with certain people. So seeking that kind of help will help you navigate a system that can seem really overwhelming and kind of mystifying. And then that, for me, carries over into graduate school as well. Like developing particular relationships so that you are not trying to navigate this new place and these new challenges on your own, whether it be finding a good advisor is something, early on, finding or a professor or two to whom you can go and talk to and ask questions about navigating academia. And I often recommend, too, finding a good therapist. Mental health is something we're talking more and more about, but graduate school is very challenging, and this kind of comes back to imposter syndrome, right? Because what are you doing? You're putting yourself under a microscope and doing your own work, which is very vulnerable. And so, and at least in literary studies, what do? We offer critique, right? That's what we're doing. And for me, I internalize that, my little voice that is called the professor, right? That's what I call it. But finding, using all the tools in your toolkit so that you can be in a good space, emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, to kind of face some of the rigors and not just survive them, but like really enjoy that time. Because grad school is really freaking hard, and it's really freaking awesome too, the relationships and the things that you're able to do.
I love what you said about thriving. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
I was just going to add one other thing about thriving, and that is I think the way that you thrive when there's sometimes tough times during it is to remind yourself why you went there and that you're supposed to be there. So I recommend, especially anytime you decide to go on to grad school, and even obviously any decision in your life, but big ones like if you're going to keep going on, that I feel like you really need to have a confirmation, to pray about it and to make sure you know that that's your path for you, because you can always go back to that moment and say, I know I'm supposed to be here, and remind yourself of it and call yourself back to that moment, because no matter how hard or difficult it gets, you have that moment to remind yourself. And I think especially for women, when you have all these mixed messages often about if you should be there or not, if you have that confirmation, then it makes it easier to get through any of those highs and lows.
Dr. Weitzman, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just want to add, when you're in grad school, it's really important also to build a network of people that understand you and support you. So for me, a big part of that, I was a new mom when I started my master's program. And I went to Indiana University for both my master's and my PhD, and there were not a lot of other moms who were in these grad programs or really anywhere on campus. And so if I hadn't intentionally built a network of moms like me in both my master's and then later in my PhD program, there weren't a lot of us, but we met at least once a semester. We talked about what professors were family friendly, how we handled childcare. Sometimes we offered childcare to each other. We talked through all of that, but it helped us remember not only that like we individually belonged there, but that even as, in that case, even as a mom, that it was an okay choice to make, and there were other people making that choice, and we could do that kind of together as a team.
Does anyone else want to comment on anything to do with applying, surviving, or thriving in graduate school before we move on? These are some great comments. One thing I loved about graduate school was every class was something I was interested in, right? Like it wasn't like I had to take, chemistry or physics or American Heritage. It was all psychology, right? And it was such an exciting thing if you're really interested and passionate about the subject. Let's see. Let's talk about careers in academia. So what do you believe is the biggest challenge facing women in academia? The biggest. Or just one of many, if you'd like to comment on something.
So I would say a couple things about just that there's known statistics about women in academia, and especially in the area that I work in medicine, there's actually a lot of research going on in this. And so there's lots of disparities in many of the opportunities for women. So first of all, positions, we have fewer women faculty. And then you add the layer of being a member of the church, right? There's fewer women faculty who are members of the church. There's fewer women in leadership roles. Women still do get paid less, right? Like just being a woman in academia puts you a little bit behind. And so that's I think the biggest challenge is we're starting behind a lot of the starting line. We're back behind the starting line. And so I think that's the biggest challenge that we're working on. And so I think if you know the statistics, you have to know where you're starting, and then be okay being the outlier and saying, I'm going to be this person who's going on to school. We don't have enough faculty mentors. Now that our pipeline's a little better and we have more women going to school, and we're almost at parity there, but we're not with faculty being able to mentor women. And so be that outlier. It's fine to be the one that you feel like are the only one in the classroom or whatever it might be, and it's okay. And so knowing those things and pushing forward and knowing that you're meant to be there, I think is the key.
I think another challenge that we encounter is parenting, right? We want to have children, and unfortunately we're the ones that are pregnant for 9 months, not our husbands, and that can be hard sometimes for male faculty to understand and to grasp that you're working with, particularly male administrators. When I came to BYU, my department chair was like, you're pregnant? I don't know what to do. You go figure it out. And I started searching. I was really shocked. There was very little, if any, information here at BYU. I'd come from Johns Hopkins. Okay, so let's put this in perspective here, all right? So I'd come from a huge university with a huge medical program that had everything all figured out, and I had a son or my daughter there at Johns Hopkins, and I come to BYU, and I'm having my son, and they're like, I don't know, you figure it out. I was just really crazy. And I think sometimes as a woman in academia, particularly one that's having a family at the same time that you're pursuing your academic careers, you need to find support people that will support you in your goals to raise a family at the same time, because a lot of times people say you can do one or you can do the other, but you can't do both, and that's not true. But I think, again, like Eva said, you need a network of people that you can work with, sharing daycare, things like that, and you need to be an advocate for yourself sometimes, because you may be the first one. Mm-hmm. Like I was the first one in my department. I was the first woman to get pregnant. The dean had no clue. The chair had no clue. And so I started making phone calls to the VP's office, right? What are my benefits? What can I do? And you might have to advocate for yourself. But I think the child raising side of things oftentimes falls more heavily on women than it does on men. We're seeing the reports from COVID coming in. And as a result, sometimes we don't progress as quickly academically as our male peers do, because we do take off time to have children. or we do, I mean, the statistics are there. We carry more of the burden in our homes of child caring and child rearing. Now, you can be like me and marry an awesome husband who carries more than his fair share. He's awesome, but not all women have that situation going on or can afford to have that situation going on. Academia is more flexible, and you're often the one that, if someone has to be home during COVID, right, you have the flexibility that maybe your spouse doesn't have. So I think overcoming those parenting, I think that's a challenge, still is a challenge.
Well, and I think that also piggybacking off of that is just that there are still these gender biases unconscious in terms of gendered expectations of what female faculty either are capable of or should or could do as opposed to male faculty. And so, for example, very few women are considered for leadership positions. We have very few female chairs, deans, and so on and so forth. However, women, studies have shown female academics carry the lion's share of citizenship or service work, right? Because, we got that nurture juice leaking through our veins, so of course we should be on all the committees. And what they're finding is that women carry the lion's share of that work, and thus they are not able to have as much time dedicated to their research. In some ways, you could, to frame it as female faculty work the second shift for a department. And so therefore, that's another thing that can get in the way at times of our career progressing, is that maybe with good intentions, they want female representation on all of these things. And if there aren't a lot of women, then the few women are asked to do a lot of things. And that's where, again, self-advocacy comes into play. I did not do that as junior faculty. When I went up for tenure, it was ridiculous how much I had done and agreed to do. And now, as a more senior faculty, I guess I am senior faculty, I'm constantly advising female junior faculty that it is okay to say no, to advocate for themselves, and to make sure that they are not carrying a disproportionate amount of the service work for their department.
Any other challenges before we move on to all of the joys of being an academic female?
I think there's a general, this isn't necessarily gendered, but I think we have some pretty unhealthy still views about work and its role in our lives. And a lot of that, especially if you're stepping into something that has traditionally been a more masculine role, we get kind of a masculinized view of work where you are separated from your family for long hours and you're supposed to do that and that's what's expected of you. And I don't think that's healthy for men. I don't think it's healthy for women. One of the things that working at BYU has afforded me is this real responsibility for mentoring students. And I realized that if I was mentoring students, I didn't want to teach them that toxic culture, which meant that I needed to not be living that toxic culture. Like, if I don't want it for you, why would I want it for myself? And that allowed me to create a better balance, because I realized that by leaving work to pick up my kids from school and spend that time with them, maybe before, I often then went back after they were in bed and worked on my papers and prepared for class and did all of that stuff after bedtime. But, for a while I felt really guilty about that, about leaving sort of during that 9 to 5 work time. And then I realized, no, like this is me mentoring my students, me being the best person, the most whole person I can be, the best parent, the best wife, is me teaching my students how to balance their lives too, and to live those healthy lives. And so I think there are gender components to that, but I also think it's just a pretty toxic work culture that I think we're all trying to push back against, especially in the wake of COVID. I think that's exposed a lot of this. And so hopefully we're in a situation now where we can work to improve it.
Thank you. I really appreciate how you talked about having some work-life balance as part of mentoring for your students. I think sometimes as academics, we talk about the hard things of our jobs, or especially as women, sometimes we talk about the challenges. And I would love to switch now to talk about some of the joys or passions or the things that you love about being a woman in academia. Come on. I can talk forever.
My most favorite thing, honestly, is to use the telescope and look at stars, right?
Awesome.
I mean, I literally in the dome in this building, right, on the ESC building, I will literally be on my back looking up through the telescope, through the dome at the sky, just because for me that's just joy. And I think that's the best part of being in academia is you have so much choice, right? I think in the past, we often tried to stereotype women into certain career roles. And you don't have to do that, right? I think it's so important to pursue your passion. In academia, I can pursue my passion. I can study astronomy, I can study the stars, and I love every minute of it. And that's the best part for me about being in academia is I'm constantly learning and growing and exploring, which at least for me, that's what I love. And I don't think I would enjoy working. I mean, I'm great at math. I could have been an accountant, but I would not be happy, right? And so being an academic has allowed me to pursue the things that I love and share that love with my students and hopefully instill in them that same passion as they look for their own passions. But I think it's important academia gives you a chance to find your passion.
For me, it really has become the ways in which, continually learning, but learning with and from my students. I often say that to them, oh, I'm so excited to learn with you this semester, and they kind of look at me funny at the first. But, the teaching contemporary literature as I do, and teaching, literature that's speaking to the issues of our day, whether it be white supremacy, patriarchy, classism, homophobia, you name it, because that's what's being talked about in the literature of today. My students and I really get to have these meaningful conversations. I feel like the work we're doing is work that is helping us to see the world differently, to see each other differently. Again, the power of story. And then that, infuses my own research as I'm reading right now about reading literature by contemporary Black female authors and the work that they are doing in the current freedom struggle. And to me, it makes me feel like what I do matters. And that these relationships matter because, again, not to get all humanities-ish, because I know this happens in all of our disciplines, right? But the more that we can learn from each other, the more that we can see both our connection, but also the ways in which our differences, elevate us as a whole. And I feel like through my work as a scholar and as a teacher and a mentor, I'm able to invite people to see the world differently and hopefully a little bit better.
Thank you.
What
else
I
do you
love? Oh,
Please.
ready? Okay. What I especially love about academia is the variety of roles I get to play. So when my example of my day in the life, like I love being able to have some time that I get to actually still do clinical work. I love that I get to teach in a classroom. I love that I get to do research. So having those, multiple ways in which you can, on any given day, pick what you want to do and be able to have that versatility. I love that instead of having only one kind of set thing that I do all the time. I love academia usually gives you opportunities to grow in new ways. So some of the leadership and administrative roles that I've been doing lately have been a new way to grow. And, academia provides those options. And you do have to advocate for yourself and make an effort to get some of those things, especially administrative and leadership roles, as a woman especially, but it's like you have all these options. And so in academia, I love that you can do many different things. For some people, that feels stressful to them. I understand, and so it's not for everyone, but for me, academia provides you just so much interesting different choices every day that you can engage in. And one thing that I think is very powerful that we do as academicians is that we have the ability to have impact on the evidence that's out there. So through our research, what we publish, the grants that we get and the research that we conduct, like we're creating the truth, and that's pretty powerful, and it informs clinical practice, it informs new teaching methods, whatever it might be. And so it's quite a impressive position, and one that we have to be humble about, but it's powerful. So you make a big impact, and then when you teach on students, what you teach them and what they learn from you, it's just such a powerful and impactful role.
I love everything everyone said, and I totally agree. I have two more that I thought of that I would add. One is that universities are communities. And so by participating in your university, you're participating in a community that you can help to shape. Your program is going to be a community within that, and your classroom or your cohorts of students are going to be another community even inside that. So there's this like amazing opportunity to like be the change you want to see in the world and create like a little corner of the world where, you know, you're teaching certain values or certain ideals and you're like working with people to create Zion, really. And you can do that in these communities and participate in those. And then you also have the opportunity to participate, and this is the second one I would say, in the broader community outside the university. One of the things that this kind of position offers you is a voice that is different from other types of voices. And it comes with, for better or worse, in our increasingly democratized society of information, it comes with some heft to put a Ph.D. behind the end of your name, right? Or to put your research behind the things that you're saying. And so being able to research things that can have that impact and then using that voice, whether it's through opinion editorials or consulting work or clinical work or whatever it is that you're doing, that can really be meaningful and powerful.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, let's move on to some audience questions. If you have a question, just raise your hand. If I call on you, stand up and speak up. Who has a question? Great. Thank you. What's your name? Cassie, thank you. Please stand up. I'm just having you stand up so that the overhead microphone can pick you up.
Okay. Loved so much of what you all have shared. I'm coming back to this question of like having a vision of what you want. I think I get really afraid of identifying that because I don't want it to not happen. And sometimes, all the social pressures, I feel like that won't come to pass. So was there ever a point like that you did like kind of name what you wanted, or you're like, I know that I want my future to look like this? Did you vision board? Did you, and did you find that naming process helpful? Or did you just kind of like magically one day have everything you want?
What a great question. What do you guys think?
If that happened to anyone, I want to hear about it.
I wanted to tell a little bit about my story because when I got accepted to graduate school, shortly after that, I discovered that I was pregnant. And I immediately had a million fears. And I didn't have some grand vision for what I was going to do, right? I was working at a nonprofit organization, and I realized I didn't know how to manage that organization, so my opportunities there were limited. So I wanted to go learn how to be a manager. So I looked up grad school to go do that, right? And then I was pregnant, and I was also very, very sick. I actually ended up on bed rest. Like, it was a very difficult time, and I super questioned whether that was even something I should do anymore, and had that eventually that like clear impression that said that that is what I should do. And then fast forward several years, I get this job, right? This great academic job. And literally every single year, I would go through a whole decision process of like, Lord, is this still what you want me doing? Is this still where you want me to be, right? And one day my husband was like, you are exhausting me, because every time you go through one of these panics, I'm like, does that mean I need to go get a different job than the one I have because we need to like make up your salary? Like, I need some lead time on this, because if I'm getting a job to make up your salary, like I need like 6 months of lead time. So is there any chance, this is my husband, is there any chance you could just like pray about whether or not you're supposed to have like a long-term career in this, rather than like praying year to year, is this still where you want me, Lord? And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. Let me try that. And so I prayed about it, and the answer was yes. You know, this is what I have in mind for you, is to have this career. And I was like, okay. At that point, I began visioning what I wanted. But I was already here. I was already in this job. I was already doing it. I was already most of the way toward continuing faculty status tenure. So it took a minute. And the other thing I would say about that is like, build a vision, recognizing that it's a beautiful vision and it's probably not going to be exactly what you planned, and that tomorrow your vision for yourself may change. But like, that's okay. Build a beautiful vision and work toward it, and then adjust to your new beautiful visions. And that will help you realize that even if one beautiful vision doesn't come all the way to fruition, it's a stepping stone and a pathway to the beauty that will be your life.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. And I think a theme that probably all of us would share is that you might have some ideas, but like as you start moving into them, they become more clear, right? And so as you take classes, you realize you like this type of content area more, and so you might head that way for your major. And then as you do it, you realize you want this nuanced part of that, and so you do more in that direction. So I think, part of the answer is that yes, there's a little bit that but as you move towards it, you might find there's something even better or more nuanced about it. And I said earlier that I agree that you have to pray about this and you have to have a confirmation that this is your path in life. And that you can always go back to that when there's the highs and lows. But there is a part that you do have to be very strategic about, especially if you're wanting to be in position, like if you're going on for a PhD, you really need to think about where do you want to go, because you want to have scholarships that'll pay for you to go there, right? Like which programs will give you scholarships, which programs will have the best potential opportunities for a future career when you want to have, when you're thinking about family and kids and this or that. So yes, you definitely have to strategize, but you also have to have faith and do a few of the steps first. And as you do them, more clarity comes.
I wanted to add too, right? Marriage can kind of throw a wrench into things a little bit. So you have your vision when you're single of what you're going to do and become. Then you get married. And I think it's really important to share your vision with your future spouse. Make sure you're on the same page with this, right? Make sure that they're going to support you and you're going to support them, because there is a lot of, like Eva's example of her husband, he's freaking out. There's a lot of give and take and a lot of sacrifice that takes place. I really thought I would be staying at home being a research scientist, right? I loved doing research and it was fun. And then BYU gave a phone call and I was like, oh, I'd never even considered being a professor before. It was not even my plans. I just thought, my husband's got this great job with NASA. We're going to live in Maryland for the rest of our lives, and I can keep working at Johns Hopkins as a research scientist indefinitely, and it's great. And then I got a phone call, and then we had to readjust that vision, and as a couple together, we prayed, we made decisions. He started working from home. We did all sorts of sacrifices so that I could take this position. So I think it's important, as you're looking for a spouse, make sure, if you're not married yet, make sure that spouse is on the same page with you and supports your visions and you support one another. And I think that's where your vision is going to change as well, as it becomes two of you working as a team to accomplish your vision as a couple.
Amen. Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Please. What was your name?
My name is Grace.
Hi, Grace.
My question is, I talked to a lot of female professors before, and one thing she told me is she's it's not about being the smartest person in the room, but it's being about the hardest working. And I guess we kind of talked about it a little bit with imposter syndrome, but I wanted to know if in your careers, if that's been true, that if just being the hardest working gets you the success you need.
For me, I busted my chops when I began, and for various reasons. I think that working hard, that's a double-edged sword, and you have to be careful, because I think that, yes, to be successful in academia, you have to work hard. However, I think that can easily run away from you. So my first couple years here, I was spending 14 hours on campus every day. And that was unhealthy. And also I think that was unnecessary. And I think that, it is important to be disciplined and to approach what you do and work hard. But I also think it's important to set boundaries in that. So just kind of reply to that. But I think that you also have to trust in your knowledge and your skills, right? You may not be the smartest person in the room, but you may know the most about this one thing because that's where you've done your research. And Dr. So-and-so hasn't, right? And so trusting in what you have done, I think that is important, and recognizing that in a department, everyone has a different area of specialty, and while some may think theirs is like the most important or legit specialty within the department, critical theory, other areas of specialty are just as important and just as valid and contribute to the body of knowledge that we have. And so I think that also keeping that in mind, that, yeah, I may not be like the best Duridian on campus, but, I bring an approach to critical studies of race and gender that other people don't, and that's an important contribution.
I think that being smart was one of my greatest handicaps, especially in college, as I was trying to learn new things. because what I was able to do was rely on being smart to get through classes and do well in them, which prevented me from actually learning stuff. And I realized that when I was in grad school. And I couldn't just rely on being smart because there's a whole bunch of new stuff that I'd never experienced before, and there was no way for me to have experienced before, and I had to learn it. And I realized that a lot of the people around me had learned how to learn. So it's not just working hard, but it's also knowing how to learn, understanding how your brain works, understanding how to pick apart an idea and create little pieces out of it, and know when you've like understood each of those pieces, and knowing yourself, like when you've mastered a concept rather than having that like professor tell you good job. And those are all skills that I didn't learn until graduate school. And once I'd sort of experienced that and really like learned how to learn, I actually mourned all of the like lost opportunity that I'd had in every educational setting before that because I had relied on being smart. So not only would I say that it's not about being the smartest in the room, but I would say if you are the smartest in the room, don't let that be what this is about for you, because you will miss out on so much. And I've definitely seen lots of students who simply like systematically and intentionally learned a subject far outperform the students that I would have sort of pointed at and said, that's, you know, that's the bright one, or that's the one with a natural aptitude. So that's kind of my take on your question.
I'll also just add, if that's okay, that I balancing a family, a career, personal hobbies, parenting, things like, and marriage, things like that, has made me a more, I wouldn't say I'm not necessarily a hard worker, but I'm a very efficient and deliberate worker. And I think that when you have multiple roles in your life, you learn to give all you can to the certain roles that are important. And so it's just made me a much more efficient and deliberate than I was before I was balancing and juggling all these roles. I don't know if you guys can resonate with that.
Definitely. And can I jump in with something? So unlike my colleagues on this panel, I'm not married, nor do I have children. And so I do not have the familial responsibilities that my colleagues do, but so often other colleagues assume that because I do not have that, then I have all the free time in the world. Our colleague, Dr. Jessica Birch in poli-sci has research to this effect, the assumption that single people then must have all the time to take on these additional things because they don't have that, neglecting to acknowledge that we might have relationships and responsibilities and commitments that fill up our time just as other people do. And so for those of you who may not be partnered in graduate school or academia, my advice is that you still need to have work-life balance, and you need to draw boundaries, and you need to seek out relationships, and you need to make sure that you have that time to sustain yourself emotionally, spiritually, and the like, because that is just as important, and you can have just as good of life as others do, but sometimes people will want to push those boundaries, and you will have to just kind of gently say no thank you. I was joking earlier on Twitter that I'm so looking forward to November, because that means I can say no to all the things people ask me to do, right? And so I think that work-life balance takes different forms for all of us in academia, but it's important to make sure you carve out that space to rest, to recharge, for relationships, because otherwise it will grind you down. It could grind you down.
Other questions from the audience? Please, what's your name?
Jessie.
Hi, Jessie.
So how would you say that your experiences going through grad school and academia and being where you are now, being marginalized in certain ways because you're a woman and because of your gender, how would you say that has affected you in the way that you teach and in the way that you interact with other people and planting the seeds so that these people don't have to experience the same things that you did in the same way?
I would say that's one of my favorite things I do right now in my role in this Center for Women in Medicine and Science. I mean, we create programming, we create initiatives in order to try to reduce exactly what you're talking about across all of our students and learners, but our junior faculty and mid-career and senior faculty, especially who are women and faculty of color. And so You know, it has. That is a huge thing that has been a part of my career, you know, throughout. I've always had a passion about it, but as you get further in your career, like into your full professor part of your career, you get to do a little bit more things that are not so much just about like checking the box for tenure or being able, you know, being promoted. And so that's one of my favorite things right now that I get to do. And so, you know, I think one of the things that a lot of what I've learned is a little bit about what I said earlier about you have to advocate, you know, you have to learn how to advocate for yourself and be that outlier, and that it's okay being that outlier, and really feeling that inside, and that's okay, right? And in structures and systems that haven't always been as kind of equity promoting, like you have to be aware of those. I mean, the first thing is to like understand them, right? And then know how to navigate them, and then to know how to strategize within them, and then to know how to try to change them. And so it's a process, but it's like there's a lot of people working on this right now, and so I think that you can be a part of that, and that we're in a great place, and as far as being able to move the dial on things like that, and so it's definitely been a part of my career all along, and I've been able to do even more about it now than I ever have in the past, and it's extremely rewarding.
I think one of the most important things that I do, because I'm a woman in STEM, and there are not a lot of us, and I share my personal life and what's happening in my life with my students.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the most frequent comments I get from my 127 astronomy class, which are non-majors, but a lot of the female students will comment on how cool it is that Dr. Stevens has a family and she's a professor. And a lot of times this is the first time, a lot of them are freshmen, this is the first time they really realize that, oh, I can have both. And I can do both. And she's still a great mom, and she does all this cool stuff, and she's also this cool professor. And I think with our students, helping them to, it's that we have a culture, unfortunately, that really, in some ways, marginalizes women, that says that I hate this, there's no such thing as failure in the home. But they use that almost as a sword to try to force you to do what other people say is culturally correct, and that's not true. And I think it's important to be a role model, and as a woman at BYU, I share a lot of myself that maybe I wouldn't share at other universities, because I want them to see, oh, I'm currently serving as Girls Camp Director, I'm in the primary, I want them to see a real woman living her life under her terms and her conditions, and totally comfortable. And I mean, there are women in my ward that think I'm evil, right? You know, and it's true, right? I'm not evil, but their feelings, you know. But, you know, they've got this cultural, I mean, they're just cultural, like, oh, that's not what you're supposed to do. You're not doing, I mean, I've literally been told, well, I did what I'm supposed to do, but you didn't, right? And sometimes I think sharing with my students is the most important thing, for them to see that it's okay. It's okay. You can still be a great member of the church, and be a liberal woman, and be good in athletics, and good in science, and do the things that you love. And my kids are healthier and better, I think, because their mom is happy and she does what she loves, and she encourages them to be themselves, instead of trying to also, my kids, I don't pigeonhole them into, you know, what they should and shouldn't be. And I think being me sometimes is the most important gift I give to my students.
So part of your question was about having experienced marginalization and kind of how to sort of use that. And I feel like there's like a just right amount of marginalization to have experienced, where you're not so exhausted from having been othered or doing, you know, some of these other things that we've talked about, where it can just be exhausting just to like be and do the job. And that gets hard, because then you don't have a lot of energy left to do the advocacy work. But without that experience, it's difficult to do the advocacy work well, because you don't share that lived experience. So I think there's sort of this middle ground where maybe you're not so exhausted from having actually lived that experience, that you still have some energy left to sort of reach out, and in addition to mentoring people, actually start to like push back and advocate for systemic change, which is a big, challenging, exhausting needle to move. It is possible to move. We are moving it. I think the academia you are walking into is a very different place than the academia we walked through. So some of these stories may no longer be as relevant for you. But some of that is because many of us sort of like went in there and pushed and advocated for ourselves and for each other. And I also have found that it helps to have networks of people who have that lived experience. I'm remembering some meetings that I was in my department, and I advocated for something that wasn't necessarily like my group or a group that I personally affiliate with, but I recognized what was happening because I've been in a similar position as a woman. And I had a fellow faculty member who was, in this case, a person of color, and he said, "Thank you for speaking up. I couldn't. I was so emotionally triggered by what was happening in that particular meeting that I could not do that. So I appreciate you speaking up and you saying something and you making the change that I would like to have, but I was too tired in that moment. I was too spent." So that's an ebb and a flow. There are going to be good days and bad days, and good years and good and bad years, and good decades and bad decades, right? And so you don't always have to be out there fighting. And if you're tired, like, put down your sword for a minute. It's okay to like let other people battle, but recognize that like we're all in it together. And if we stand shoulder to shoulder and lift where we stand, like we can make an impact together, and that we really can use our experiences and consecrate them for good purposes.
Yeah, and you know, I recognize that I occupy a position of incredible privilege, right? I'm a full professor, right? I am white, I am straight, I'm cisgender, you know, I am comfortably middle class. And so for me, perhaps some of the struggles of other minoritized identities on campus or within campus communities, I don't have those experiences. And so for me, I think it's important to learn from people from those different communities so that I can then be a better advocate for them, using the privilege that I have, having been here this long and cultivated the relationships that I have cultivated. And so I think that I am constantly trying to learn so that I can do that kind of work and help to further create the community that I want to exist in. And I think that a lot of times that change is hard. It's hard to convince people in a department that has run this way for how many years that they want to run a department differently, and that could not just benefit people different from them, but them in their very staid identity. But I think that it's through learning the stories of others and being able to communicate those to people that then we are better able to create an academic climate that that then perhaps people don't have to roll the rock up the mountain the same way that you did.
And one other quick thing I would add to that is, we've said this already in some way or other, but to identify yourself a mentor who will help you to get through this too. And I also talk about having a sponsor, and which is slightly different. Like, a mentor is about helping you in your own growth and development and in a content area, but a sponsor is more about putting you out there and advocating for you for whether it's positions or awards or leadership or whatever it might be, and you need both. And sometimes that mentor can be both, but sometimes it can't be. And I'm also a big advocate of like telling someone that that's what you need from them. So saying, I need you to be my mentor, or I need you to be my sponsor, and this is what will help me. And so being really explicit about that and asking people to take on specific roles in your life. And that really helps with feeling marginalized and being able to cope.
Fantastic. I'm hoping that in the 6 minutes we have left, I'm going to invite each of the panelists to share just their best advice, their words of encouragement, things that you wish you would have known before you went to graduate school. I'll just share really quickly that I think it's really important to learn good interpersonal skills to be able to do the things that the panelists have talked about, to be able to advocate for yourself, advocate for other people, learn how to communicate effectively, and learn your communication styles and get feedback from it and learn from it so that you can be an advocate for yourself and others. Let's actually start at the end of the table with Dr. Weissman.
So I think my best advice is that God knows you. He knows you as you are. He loves you as you are. And when he says, you know, when the Lord says he's going to go prepare a place for you, I don't think that's just in the future. Excuse me. I think that can be here and now as well. And so I would just echo the idea that's already been stated, that that you can and should pray about that. You're going to have a lot of choice and a lot of freedom in what you do and what you don't do. We have agency, and that's a beautiful thing, and we're going to build our own lives. But God knows you. He knows your past, your present, and your future, and He will guide you toward things that fit you beautifully that you didn't even know were options, didn't even know were possibilities. So leaning into that, even when you don't feel like you fit in the culture, when you don't feel like it makes sense for you, like following that inner voice, can really, really pay dividends.
I'm not really sure how to say this, but failure is going to happen, and how you approach failure is going to really determine what you become. And sometimes when we have trials, or I hate saying failure, but we have trials or things aren't going the way we expect them. Like I said, when one door closes, another door opens, right? And I think that's true. I want to kind of second what Eva said about personal revelation and prayer and if they're good therapists, right? Because there are going to be times you're going to you'll struggle, you'll have depression, you'll have issues of anxiety and self-worth, and one, knowing that you're a beloved daughter of heavenly parents, right? Know who you are, know your identity, and know who your divine identity is. Having that eternal perspective of who you are, and that He knows you, and He knows, and she knows you. I'm going to add that too, because that's where we are. They know you, and they know you perfectly, and they're going to help guide you to find the happiness that you're looking for, because that's what they want for you. And sometimes trials and challenges that become roadblocks, once you get beyond them and look back, you realize they were actually gifts in some ways. They put you on a different path and in a different direction that you had not previously expected or anticipated. And so I think being close to the Savior, close to your heavenly parents, and prayer is so important as you navigate, and just remember that who you are and your divine potential as a daughter of heavenly parents. And as an astronomer, I can say this, right? Because that is what you're going to become someday. So I always tell my students, don't forget to look up. Don't forget who you are, because you're going to have really rough times, and that's what's going to get you through the rough times. Those and a good network of people to tell you how wonderful you are, remind you of that.
Yeah, so we're all building on a theme here, and the piece I would add with regard to knowing who you are and understanding God's plan for you is, early on I had to think about, because I would get asked, why are you going into academia, why are you going on for your PhD? And I came to this place where I understood, like I've had this confirmation that what education is, and going on for grad school or PhD or whatever you do, is you're getting more education and you're becoming more like God. God is like all knowing and all powerful and it's perfect knowledge. And so for me, it was like, I'm going on because that's our goal in life, right? Is to become more like God. And so education gives you that. And so whether you end up having a career or not in doing academia, going on for education is a great thing, and going on as long as you can, because you are, in essence, being able to become more like God. And so doing that and just having that as your base is a great start. And then whether you decide to have a career or not is kind of the next, I guess, decision you have to make. But if you can get to that place about education and the power and importance of getting an education, it's a great place to start.
And I would just underscore that, create a community. We can call it a support network or a community of care, but I think that whether that be a good cohort from your program, friends, family, whether it be church, therapist, creating that support network, being in a community of care, not just receiving the care, but also extending care to others, when you have those relationships. I know for me, like at one point in graduate school, a good friend of mine, his wife was literally hit by a dump truck, right? They weren't LDS, but he still talks about the Mormon food that I coordinated to have people brought in, right? And then 2 years later, I was biking home from campus after a football game, which Dr. Allen will confirm is a dangerous time to be on the road. And someone saw a break in the traffic, but not me, and hit me while I was riding my bike. And I had that community of care that turned around and brought me food, and they joked. They're like, well, it's not Mormon food, but, it will still help you through. And I had people, looking in on taking over my classes for me because I had been a good peer to them. And so when you create that community and that support network, because you rarely go to graduate school where you have family. Now, I did. But my parents were going through a divorce. So it was really not exactly the time I wanted to be back there. But you rarely have that built-in network already. So that's work that you will want and need to do when you first begin. But it is so important. And those relationships and that community persists today for me. And I think that I don't know how I would have weathered graduate school without that community. Or likewise, when I began here, I knew no one in Utah. I have no family further west than Wisconsin. I moved out here. I cried every day for the first 6 months I was here thinking, what did I do? But then I got myself off the chairlift at Sundance and I decided, okay, I need to build that community of care here. And I went about the work of seeking out mentors, developing relationships with friends, serving other people, finding a therapist here, all those things that helped me to weather those hard years when you're going for tenure and you're trying to build something new. And so that would be my advice.
Fantastic advice from everyone. Thank you so much. So we're out of time. I want to remind you or tell you that there's grab-and-go snacks at the back that you're welcome to take with you. And let's give one final round of applause to our participants.